You know, I don't know why it is, but it's always the recording part where I start to slow down when it comes to making videos. I can write a script just fine, I can edit a video just fine. It's when it comes down to the actual recording part of the video, I always tend to struggle, and I don't know why. But anyway, hey, what's up everybody? Commander Radix here, bringing you another video, and today we're going to talk about religion in Japan. Now, when it comes to Japan, you might know that there are two predominant religions. There's Buddhism and there's Shinto. And for many people outside of Japan, that's kind of an interesting idea, that there are two religions. And when you add up the percentages of people who worship those religions or follow those religions to some way, shape, or form, it goes over 100%, which means you have, to some level, practitioners of both religions at the same time, which is an interesting idea. So how did that come about historically? How did Japan become both a Buddhist and a Shinto country? That's what we're going to talk about today in this little video that I am titling Battleground of the Gods, the historical relationship between Buddhism and Shinto in Japan. They always had to put in that little flashy first title and then the real title. Nobody wants to click on a video titled The Historical Relationship Between Buddhism and Shinto in Japan. Anyway, I have a script here, not just bullet points, an actual script. I don't have a teleprompter, so I'm going to be diving into this, probably with a lot of pictures, right? But to understand the historical relationship between Buddhism and Shinto, we have to start at the beginning, with the native religion to Japan, Shinto. In the field of the study of religions, there is a prevailing theory that religion, or perhaps best worded as man's interactions with the divine, can be conceptualized through a series of phases, with the very first phase often being called animism. In an animist society, there is an understanding that there is more to the world than just the material. This thought is often manifested in dualist models of reality, with the reality being divided into the material and immaterial world. The material world being the world you and I inhabit, with the immaterial world being a sort of spiritual realm, the sphere where supernatural spirits reside. At some point, it is understood that all of humanity started at the animist phase, with steady development into shamanism. The idea that there are certain figures or people who can, in some way, shape, or form, cross from one world to the other. As ritual and culture and society is developed around the shamans, we begin to see the structure of a proper, organized religion. In Japan, we see the religion of Shinto existing today, but when we look back in history, Shinto takes on a different state. Following the Yayoi invasions of Japan and the spread of the Proto-Japonic people through the Japanese archipelago, these people follow their animist folk beliefs that aren't so different from other nomadic peoples in history. Of course, there's not a unified structure to the religion. One town may have different gods and conflicting stories with the next town over. Imagine how vast the difference between beliefs in the Tohoku region is compared to the first Yayoi-descended people in the Ryukyu Islands. But this large, decentralized collection of Japanese animist folk beliefs is collectively referred to as Shinto, the way of the gods. Again, this ancient Shinto is not necessarily the Shinto you have in your head of the modern Japanese belief. Yes, there were kami, a word possibly connected to the Ainu kamui, which opens up a can of worms as to whether the earliest forms of Shinto were from the Yayoi or from the older Jomon people, but we aren't going to get into that today. The kami are spirits that come in a variety of forms, whether that be as ancestral spirits or full-on deities. These are the central spirits to the Shinto faith. However, the structure with the emperor on top due to his descent from the sun goddess Amaterasu isn't necessarily the religion practiced from Okinawa to Aomori. Rather, because the Yamato clan had such a strong connection to the Amaterasu cult within ancient Shinto, Amaterasu became a leading figure due to the domination of her followers. For much of early Japanese history in the Yayoi and into the Kofun period, many Shinto followers may have never even heard of Amaterasu. That is simply how decentralized Shinto was, which is fully characteristic of animist and later shamanistic systems. So that gives us a little bit of some background onto what exactly is Shinto, a decentralized religion from Okinawa to, northern Japan, but they're not necessarily one interlocked, organized religion. A new religion will have to come from overseas into Japan to introduce this idea of an organized, structured religion. By the end of the Kofun period, the Yamato court had established its foothold in central and western Japan, and the Yamato Shinto was growing to become the main sect of the Shinto faith, although Shinto in Okinawa was also developing into a sizable alternative, isolated to the south. It was at this time that Japanese contact with the rest of East Asia reached a higher level, as Japan regularly contacted and traded with the states in China and Korea. Through this contact, as well as through the rising of foreigners in the ranks of the Yamato bureaucracy, a new religion had been introduced to Japan, that being the religion of Buddhism. Compared to the state that Shinto was in at that time, Buddhism was so much more developed, with sects, a deep and rich theology, a huge corpus of written works like the sutras, and much more. While Shinto was still in its shamanistic phase, Buddhism had gone through the forge of India, China, and Korea, a true religion of the Axial Age. In the early Asuka period, the Japanese court was the site of a battleground between conservative nativists like the Mononobe clan, who sought to keep the Amaterasu cult, versus reformists and foreigners like the Soga clan, a clan Korean in origin, that pushed for more Buddhism in Japanese society. While the Soga clan had been the driving force in bringing Buddhism to Japan, it was Prince Shotoku, a descendant of both the Amaterasu-derived imperial family and the Soga clan, who drove the Buddhist nail into the Shinto coffin. Prince Shotoku instituted a number of reforms, complete with bringing Buddhist theologians and priests from places as far away as India to oversee the Buddhistization that's not a word, of Japan. While he did not turn his back on the native Shinto beliefs, Shotoku did emphasize the importance of Buddhism to Japan, and turned the imperial court into a Buddhist land. While Shotoku had temples built across Japan as well, the fact remained that many Japanese civilians had issues understanding the complex theology of Buddhism. Multiple worlds, bodhisattvas, reincarnations, and so on were all boggling to the average peasant. While the court became a Buddhist bubble obsessed with reading and analyzing the sutras, the average Japanese person kept to their traditional beliefs at this time. So through contact with the mainland, Buddhism comes over into Japan. It is practiced by some higher-ups in the Japanese bureaucracy, and Shotoku really brings it in. But for the most part, most of the people in Japan are still relatively Shintoist, if you can call it Shintoist. I don't know if you can properly call it an ism, especially at this time. But something changes in the Kamakura period. The relationship between Shinto and Buddhism changed further, heading into the Kamakura period, as this period oversaw the emergence of a number of new sects which sought to evangelize the common people of Japan, chiefly Pure Land Buddhism, Nichiren Buddhism, and Zen Buddhism. Pure Land Buddhism offered the Japanese people a simplified theology that they could understand, one that was in many ways more simpler than the decentralized Shinto beliefs at the time that didn't jive well with a centralized Japanese state under the shoguns. All the while, the power of the emperor continued to decline. Pure Land Buddhism, and its even simpler doctrinal descendant of true Pure Land Buddhism, stressed that the path to salvation was done through praying to the Amida Buddha, by merely saying his name multiple times. This was a simple religion that brought the Japanese common people into the same deeper world their court was in, giving them the entry point to begin to study the religion in more depth. Meanwhile, the more evangelical and intolerant Nichiren Buddhism quickly spread throughout the countryside, stressing the importance of the Lotus Sutra, merely one sutra out of a seemingly never-ending corpus of sutras in the Buddhist literature. By limiting Buddhism down to one sutra, Nichiren Buddhism did the same as Pure Land and spreading far due to simplicity. The introduction of Zen Buddhism from China also changed the religious landscape of Japan, preaching self-enlightenment through meditation and self-discipline, ideas that the large population of Japanese warriors found extremely attractive. Soon, Buddhism was finding itself a place in Japan, no longer confined to merely the court religion. Through the evangelization of the common Japanese people, Shinto underwent changes as well in the mindset of the Japanese. To some, the Shinto gods and practices were primitive beliefs of a bygone day, while Buddhism was the true faith. On the other hand, other Japanese adopted the belief of Ryobu Shinto. This syncretist version of Shinto held that the kami of Shintoism were all suijaku, that is, emanations or forms of the Buddhas and Bodhisattvas, who were described by followers of Ryobu Shinto as Honji, their true form. Notably, the sun goddess Amaterasu herself was not her true form, but rather that was how the Sun Buddha Dainichi Nyorai chose to show himself to the Japanese. Dainichi Nyorai, the Sun Buddha, was the true form, and Amaterasu was his suijaku. This was how Japanese people understood the Shinto gods in the medieval period. For a time, it looked that Buddhism was gaining the upper hand in this spiritual war for Japan. But even though things aren't looking good for Shinto now in the Kamakura period, events will happen that will see Shinto rise up and even begin to overtake Buddhism. Towards the middle and end of the Kamakura period, things were changing in Japan. The island nation fell under attack by a much larger force, the Mongol Empire, which had brought about much destruction and terror throughout the Eurasian landmass. Things were looking bad for Japan, but, like a miracle, a great wave overtook the Mongols, and led to an end of their expeditions to Japan. The defeat of the Mongols was certainly seen as a miracle in Japan. Korea and even the Great China had fallen to the Mongols, but Japan was able to survive by pure luck. This led to the development of the idea of Shinkoku, that Japan was uniquely a holy land protected by the gods. But which gods protected Japan from the Mongols and delivered the divine wind, the kamikaze? It certainly wasn't the Buddhas and Bodhisattvas. After all, other nations practiced Buddhism, countries Japan had once respected as a source of divine knowledge, but these nations had fallen to the pagan Mongols. If it wasn't the Buddhas, then who saved Japan? The answer to medieval Japanese people was obvious. It was none other than the kami, those forgotten spirits that were native to Japan, gods that created Japan itself while the rest of the world stood at the periphery. The kami had saved Japan, and now it was the time to return to the way of the gods. 1333 was a special year for Japan. For one, a Buddhist priest named Jihen came to respect Shinto deeply, even going as far as to systematize its legends and beliefs along with the root, branch, and flower doctrine. According to this doctrine, Buddhism was a flower that came from the branches of Confucianism, with the very root, the core of spirituality and religion, being none other than Shinto. Eventually, the monk Koshu wrote the Keiran Shuyoshu, where he introduced the idea that Japan had the Honji Suijaku concept all wrong. It was the Japanese kami who were the Honji. They were the true gods, with the Buddhas, Bodhisattvas, and Devas being Suijaku, of the kami, manifestations of the kami outside of Japan. After all, Japan was special because it was a holy nation. Of course the kami would only show their true form to the Japanese. This movement coincided with the rise in the veneration of the emperor, as Emperor Go-Daigo stepped up and threw out the Kamakura shogunate, establishing himself as the leader of Japan, albeit temporarily. Soon enough, the Ashikaga clan would establish their own shogunate over Japan, contesting power with Go-Daigo loyalists until 1392. So now we see Shinto rising up from the ashes of the Mongol War, right? And now Buddhism is on the decline, which brings us to... During the time of the Ashikaga shogunate, Buddhism and Shinto fought for control over Japan, in some ways symbolized by the division between the Go-Daigo loyalist southern court and the Ashikaga-controlled northern court, until their eventual unification. But not long afterwards, Japan fell into a long and bloody civil war, in a time known as the Sengoku period, or Warring States period. During this time, indeed, Buddhism was still strong. The Iko-Iki Buddhist monks, for example, took political control of parts of Japan with their networks of fortresses, becoming considerable political and military powerhouses in the anarchy of the Sengoku period. However, they came into conflict with the rising Oda Nobunaga, the man who was fated to determine the future of Japanese history. Nobunaga's fierce campaigns against the Iko-Iki and Buddhist monks led to Nobunaga and his entourage of Hideyoshi Toyotomi and Tokugawa Ieyasu having no strong love for Buddhism. Eventually, by the end of the Sengoku period, Tokugawa Ieyasu sat in his palace in Edo, beginning the Edo period with the powerful Tokugawa shogunate. As a disciple of Nobunaga, Tokugawa and his descendants indeed tried to minimize the influence Buddhism had on people's lives. An uneasy Shinto-Buddhist alliance was created in reaction to the spread of Christianity, particularly in Kyushu. Following the Shimabara Rebellion, the Tokugawa shogunate forced citizens to be registered at a Buddhist temple, as Buddhism provided the organization needed to root out Christianity, something Shinto could not do due to its decentralized, unorganized nature. Despite the Tokugawa throwing a bone to Buddhism to stamp out Christianity, the future was not any more brighter for Buddhism in Japan. Things especially escalated with the overthrow of the Tokugawa shogunate in the 19th century, as Emperor Meiji took over the reins of government. The Meiji period was a time of intense reformation in all aspects of Japanese culture, and religion was not exempt. Haibutsu Kishaku was an idea spreading through Japan with loyalism to the emperor, the idea that Buddhism should be removed from Japan, with Shinto taking the role as the state's main religion. With the emperor, the divine descendant of Amaterasu herself, in the driver's seat of Japan, Meiji brought about the Shinbutsu Bunri, the formal and official desyncretization of Japan, removing Buddhism and Shinto from each other. Shinto itself underwent a number of reforms to de-Buddhify it, along with other reforms with the goal of centralizing the Shinto religion, with the emperor at the top. While surely local traditions continued, Shinto was understood to have one corpus of mythologies with the Kojiki at its core, and the emperor as a holy figure. Eventually, this evolved into State Shinto, the institutionalization of Shinto as Japan's official religion and total obedience to the emperor expected for all of society. Buddhism was still there, but it found itself repeatedly conceding to State Shinto just to survive. So with the Meiji Restoration and the establishment of the Japanese Empire, things are not looking so good for Buddhism, but Shinto is there at the top. But events will eventually transpire that are similar to events the Western world experienced back during World War I. This is where we get to talk about the war. We all know the story of World War II, and you likely know the role State Shinto had in the global conflict. As Japan waged war across the Pacific and East Asia, Japanese soldiers threw themselves to their deaths in the name of the emperor and a chance to be enshrined as a hero. Ultimate sacrifice for the emperor was seen as the duty of the Japanese, as pilots crashed their planes in emulation of the kamikaze from the days of the war with the Mongols. What you might not know is, during all this, the Buddhist temples supported the war effort and promised victory to their followers. Of course, things did not go well for the Japanese Empire. On top of experiencing all the horrors of war, which Europe after World War I can tell you can really shake one's faith, Japan's strong belief in Shinkoku, that it was a holy nation protected by the kami and destined for glory, was shattered when the United States detonated the atomic bombs over the skies of Hiroshima and Nagasaki, and the emperor himself ordered the surrender of Japan. Things were not looking well for either Shinto nor Buddhism following World War II, as Japan fell under occupation and economic hardship. On the Shinto side, state Shinto was dismantled and Shinto regressed back into a semi-decentralized state with no unifying leader. The emperor was forced to denounce his divinity, albeit not necessarily his divine ancestry. Nonetheless, many Japanese saw Shinto as a facade, a superstition from the past that was not fitting for the modern world. At the same time, many Japanese felt betrayed by Buddhism, as the temples promised them victory. So many sects predicted a world war where Japan would succeed and spread Shinto and Buddhism. Buddhism, too, fell by the wayside. In their place, the Japanese had no choice but to buckle down, accept a form of nihilism that there was no holy realm to protect them, and face a reality where they needed to rebuild their broken country from the ground up through their own hard work. Even today, the mark of World War II can be seen on the Japanese psyche. I'm sure we know of Japan as being a secular society with religion at an all-time low, lower than many other countries in the world. The Shinto shrines and the Buddhist temples still stand and, in some ways, recovered some of the prestige lost with World War II, but the mindset of the Japanese has completely changed. To visit the shrine or temple is engraved in Japanese culture, just as a Westerner may celebrate Christmas without necessarily believing in Christ. These shrines and temples do not represent anything higher than the material value they provide to cultural, secular ritual. In the place of finding meaning, many Japanese focus on their work, taking pride in their overtime as if they were still trying to rebuild a country from a crippling war, without realizing that their nation has already become a relative economic powerhouse in the global system. In place of the priest or pleasing the gods, the boss has become the highest power in Japanese society. Instead of a ritual reading of the texts or prayer, ritual has become the morning meeting at work and making sure you sit at the right seat in the basically mandatory after-work hangout in the evening. Gone are the days where a man leaves his family to fulfill his duty to the emperor and die in a foreign war. Now are the days when a man leaves his family to work overtime until he eventually dies from it. Like the kamikaze pilot thinking he is giving his life to protect his family, the salaryman thinks he is giving his life to provide for his family, a family that does not know him and a wife that does not love him, if he ever has a family at all. Of course, there will be those who turn to religion to fill the gap in their life, but feel a distrust at the traditional Buddhist or Shinto route, if they even look at them as religions at all and not cultural decoration. Instead, they will turn to the new religions, which are becoming popular in East Asia. New religions that, more often than not, turn out to be cults. And before they are cognizant of it, a lost youth might find themselves following their guru of the new religions and launching a gas attack on the Tokyo Metro. Well, that's a bleak way to end that. But I hope this video helps you understand the historical relationship between Shinto and Buddhism in Japan. There's another element in the mix, and that is Confucianism, which I didn't really touch on. Maybe we'll talk about Confucianism in Japan at another point in time, but Confucianism never really came to the high level that Buddhism and Shinto did at different points in Japanese history. And in the modern day, we see the rise of new religions, that is Shinshukyo. This is things like you have the Unification Church that I think is based out of South Korea, which has had actions that led to the assassination of Prime Minister Shinzo Abe. And then you also have the Aum Shinrikyo, which is another Shinshukyo, a new religion that, ends up just being a terrorist organization. And unfortunately, those are on the rise here in Japan, more so than Buddhism or Shinto. Those aren't really traditions that Japan seems to want to return to. Anyway, I hope you enjoyed the video. Subscribe to the channel if you want to see more videos about history, mythology, religion, humanities, philosophy, all that jazz. Check out my social media. Links are in the description. Check out that. You might enjoy it there. And yeah, have a great day, ladies and gentlemen.